What is this?
I've had a few optional extras installed.
It's been no secret over the years that I am a fan of James Bond, but my favorite James Bond movie out of all of them is the 1987 The Living Daylights starring Timothy Dalton. And it's not one that I grew up with in childhood. I actually grew up with Dr. No, Goldfinger, Thunderball, and For Your Eyes Only on videocassette. I did see The Living Daylights in 1987 once as a child, and then I saw License to Kill 2 years later in the theater, and that was about it. I never saw those films very often again. I think I saw License to Kill more on cable than Living Daylights because it just never seemed to crop up. And then when I revisited The Living Daylights in college, because I remembered liking it, I remembered thinking it was a good movie, suddenly I was blown away by how well it was aging and just where it took the franchise from View to a Kill. And I fell in love with it. It was my favorite Bond movie almost instantaneously on that revisit. But like a lot of Bond movies, it doesn't have a lot of merchandising behind it. It has a lot of die-cast scaled cars, and there was this really cool pistol replica for the Walther PPK sold in Germany back in the day, and that was about it. There wasn't much to be had, and they haven't done a lot of figures of the different actors and actresses from the various films, probably because of hellacious licensing hurdles. And then one day I was in the store picking up the Legos for the Indiana Jones sets, and I happened to see the Speed Champions range. And these are ranges of minifigure scaled cars that are of various legitimate makes. They are actually licensed to carry the brand badge logos of the various car companies. And I was shocked to see that they had done a 007 version that was the Aston Martin DB5, the very famous Bond car from Goldfinger. And I thought, man, it would be so cool if Speed Champions would end up doing the Aston Martin V8 Vantage from The Living Daylights, which is my favorite Aston out of the whole Bond franchise. No surprise. Well, around this time, I started getting invested in trying to build the Lego Last Crusade tank. And that was when I became familiar with Rebrickable. And then you saw the video that I did about that. Well, when that happened, I thought, maybe there's somebody online that has done a minifigure scale Living Daylights Aston Martin. And I found one. I found a few that were various scales. Some of them were really big detailed scales, but I wanted a minifigure scale Aston Martin because I planned to get minifigures put together of Timothy Dalton and Miriam Dabo from the chase scene outside Bratislava. The plans off Rebrickable that I chose to do this build were from SFH Bricks. There were a number of other plans for the Aston Martin V8, but they were not Speed Champions scale or intended design, and that's what I wanted. So of course I went with the SFH instructions. The initial challenge with any custom Lego MOC build is you need the parts. So once you buy the plans off Rebrickable, you're immediately off to Albricks or Bricklink or some service like that to start getting all the parts you need. SFH Bricks plans only focus on the car itself. They do not bother to design the minifigures for you, which is fine. That's a simple enough task if you just put the time in, and I needed the design of the car. So I went and I sourced all the parts, and I ended up putting together the original build. In building the SFH version, I started to immediately notice that all of those black parts weren't going to work for the final design. The original Aston Martin V8 was Cumberland Gray, and while I thought maybe the black would hint at the Cumberland Gray, which is why it was chosen because it's a very dark gray, when I actually put the car together, everything that was detailed about the car really got lost. And I thought, you know what? I'm gonna buy all these parts again in the darkest gray possible and start over. I'm gonna revise this whole build from the ground up. I want this to be as accurate as I can get it. And so that's what I did. And I went back and I got all the parts again in dark gray or medium gray, whatever the darkest version is called. And I rebuilt the car from the ground up, keeping all of the black pieces that were necessary or couldn't be swapped out for anything else. Specifically, the interior of the car. The interior of the Aston Martin V8 is black leather. So I wanted to make sure the seats, the dash, and the console were all black parts. Certain pieces of the grille, certain pieces of the rear clip, they also needed to stay black Lego. The rest of it was going to be medium gray Lego or light gray Lego, depending on what parts those pieces were trying to depict on the car. A lot of the interior pieces in the SFH design tended to be white plastic or black on black plastic, and that wasn't going to work for the accuracy of the vehicle in the film. This was an Aston Martin V8 Vantage, which they say were rebadged 1976 Oscar India editions, which means that they had nice wood trim inside the interior to accent certain panels and console areas. So I wanted those parts to be brown, and most importantly, I wanted the shifter knob to be black and not white, because that white piece was totally inaccurate to the design. The big final hurdle was reversing the driver and passenger seats, because yes, for some reason, SFH put the driver's seat on the American side of the car, which really doesn't make a lot of sense. But fortunately, this was a very easy swap over. It just takes a little bit of careful thinking about the instructions when you're building the car, and it's all good, said and done, and you can move on with your life. The vehicle, I thought, immediately looked better in the medium gray. While I would prefer it to be a few shades darker gray, the black was just too much. And so I think the medium gray is the only reasonable compromise. But it looks really good now that it's on display this way. Next up was the minifigures, though. I had to get those right. And so I scoured through all these databases looking for different faces and expressions and trying to find the right costumes or close enough. And for Timothy Dalton, I landed on using a number of Marvel parts and some generic parts to put together a kind of Timothy Dalton from the chase scene look, where he has a kind of black leather jacket on under a sweater. That was pretty much Dalton's look. I made sure to give him black hands so that he looks like he had gloves, and then I gave him a Brick Mania Walther PPK with a silencer just to add to the whole Bond accessory set for this custom display piece. Maryam Dabo's Cara Milovi proved to be more difficult because I couldn't find a minifigure that actually was wearing a thick white winter coat. I found people wearing scarves, I found minifigure bodies wearing coats, but they were always the wrong color combos. And I'm not really somebody that knows a lot about screen printing and water slide stickering minifigures, so I ultimately settled on a minifigure that was wearing a sort of light blue winter coat and had a scarf to give the general look and appearance of somebody who was in a Bratislavan winter. I made sure she had a head with a swappable expression so she could go from serene to scared, because there are a number of moments in the chase where she goes from concentrating to suddenly kind of losing it, understandably, because of what's going on.
This road only leads to the lake.
And then the hair itself was pretty easy, given that Maryam Dabo's hairstyle in The Living Daylights was pretty straightforward. The last touch to this was, because Timothy Dalton had a PPK accessory, I wanted to make sure that Cara had an accessory as well. And so I went online and found instructions for how to build a minifigure scale cello, and then I got those parts as well, and Cara now has a cello. One of the coolest features of the SFH design for the Aston Martin V8 is that they provided the parts that you would need to either deploy or retract all of the gadgets. So you have swappable pieces. So you have missiles or no missiles in the front. You have the engine, turbine, jet, rocket on the back, or none. And of course you have the outriggers on the sides that can then be pulled off, and then you can put the trim pieces on to make them look like they're retracted into the car seamlessly. Which also helps if you just want a good Lego build of the Aston Martin V8 as it is and you're not interested in having a Bond car. There's also the ability to remove the center caps on the hubs of the wheels so that you can add a translucent red antenna to simulate the laser that comes out during the chase.
Stop!
I haven't done that myself yet, but it's nice to know that I can do that someday if I want. And of course, because it's Lego, you can, if you wish, remove that front passenger side tire to really make the outrigger scene accurate.
James!
Now, I mostly prefer my Aston Martin V8 to be on its tires, so I'm not going to be doing that very often, but for this video, I wanted you to see that that also is possible. Like the Indiana Jones Last Crusade tank before, I'm just really thrilled that I finally have a playable toy of the Living Daylights Aston Martin. Do I wish that it was action figure based and a traditional toy like we had when we were kids in the 80s? Yes, I do, but I'm so grateful that LEGO is so versatile that I'm able to realize these dreams thanks to enterprising people on the internet who have a lot of talent and who put together these amazing custom builds. And then you can go out there and get those parts and do it yourself. The fans are doing the best work, and the fans just gave me my first figure-scale Living Daylights Aston Martin V8, and I couldn't be happier.
Time to leave.